The whole president actually went so far as to call the sheriff on me for swimming in my own backyard lake. A lake I'd owned for 15 years before her subdivision was even a thought. Picture this, I'm drifting quietly at sunset, enjoying the calls of loons echoing across the water, when the wail of sirens tears through the evening air like a saw through silk. Deputy Martinez pulls into my gravel drive, looking just as baffled as I was. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I've got to write you a citation complaint from the HOA," he says, trying hard not to laugh. And there's Karen Whitmore, planted at my property line, arms folded, flashing that practiced smile that never touches her cold eyes. The fine, $1,000 for unauthorized recreational water use in a restricted zone. I stood there, dripping wet, staring at the ticket. "Ma'am, this is my lake. I built this dock with my own two hands back when you were still out in California. How would you feel if someone tried to dictate what you could do with your own water?" Drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? I bet plenty of you have HOA nightmares of your own. What Karen didn't realize was that I'd spent 2 decades as a municipal finance director. Big mistake. Let me rewind. My name's Garrett. 3 years ago, I lost my wife, Sarah, to cancer. After 22 years together, losing her felt like half my soul had been torn away. The grief was crushing, like you can't breathe, can't think, can't even picture tomorrow without them. So, I did what any shattered widower might. I moved out into the middle of nowhere, or close enough. I inherited my grandfather's 4-acre place in rural North Carolina, complete with a spring-fed lake that had been in our family since 1952. Pop built the original cabin himself after returning from Korea, and that lake had once been his salvation. Now, it was about to become mine. The water was crystal clear, fed by underground springs, surrounded by towering pines that smelled like Christmas morning. At dawn, this floated across the lake like spirits rising, while loons called in the distance. I'd sit on the dock Pop built, sipping coffee from Sarah's favorite chip mug, watching trout rise. The quiet was healing. No traffic. No deadlines. Just the wind in the trees and the splash of a fish now and then. For 20 years, I'd been the finance director for Millbrook County, tracking budgets and catching shady contractors padding invoices. That job taught me one thing: most government harassment comes from obscure ordinances nobody ever challenges. That lesson would soon come in handy after Sarah passed. I retired early. The lake became my refuge, my therapy, my purpose. And then came Karen, a whirlwind in designer heels, demanding to speak with Mother Nature's manager. In 2019, a developer bought the old logging road by my north fence. Suddenly, bulldozers roared. Chainsaws whined. And 100-year-old oaks fell. The scent of diesel and fresh-cut timber filled the air, replacing my quiet mornings. Within 2 years, 47 oversized McMansions sprouted like weeds. They called them lakeside luxury estates for funny, since the only lake view was mine. Still, people forked over $800,000 to stare at water they didn't own. Karen rolled in from California, in a white BMW with real TR1 plates and an ego to match. Blonde highlights that probably cost more than my groceries, a handbag worth more than my truck, and a plastic smile that said, "I've never met a homeowner's fee I couldn't raise." 6 months later, she'd installed herself as HOA president and launched her crusade to civilize us locals. It started with fake friendly visits. She'd clack across my gravel and stilettos sounded like a tap dancer seizing up bearing store-bought cookies, and backhanded compliments about how quaint my cabin was. Her perfume cloud mixed with the pine breeze, turning my porch into a funeral parlor. When I politely declined her offer to buy my land for 60 cents on the dollar, the mask slipped. The shark underneath showed her teeth. Then came the complaints. My dock was unpermitted. I showed county officials the paperwork dated 2008, older than half her neighborhood. Next, she claimed my trout were polluting the watershed. The inspector laughed and said my water was cleaner than most city taps. But Karen wasn't finished. She had done her research. She dug up an old, forgotten ordinance, a dusty ordinance from the 1920s about recreational water permits. The sort of archaic regulation that clings to law books like a fossilized parasite became Karen's weapon of choice. Back in my municipal career, I'd seen how forgotten rules like this could be resurrected and turned against property owners who didn't know any better. Karen persuaded the county commissioners, most of whom had been her real estate clients not long ago, to rewrite the rule retroactively, overnight. Any activity on a lake within 500 feet of residential developments suddenly required HOA approval. My lake, which had been here for 70 years before her neighborhood even existed in a developer's imagination, was now under Karen's supposed jurisdiction. A woman who had lived here for barely a year and a half was trying to regulate water my family had stewarded for 3 generations. That's when she overplayed her hand. She called the sheriff on a widower, a man still grieving, who was simply trying to find peace on his own land. Wrong move, Karen. Very wrong move. 2 weeks after the swimming citation, she escalated. I was on my porch, savoring my morning coffee, when I heard several cars crunching up my gravel driveway. The crisp pine air was suddenly polluted by the unmistakable blend of desperation, cheap cologne, and polyester sweat, the aroma of small-time grifters. Karen emerged from her BMW with a victorious smirk, followed by a man in a rumpled county inspector uniform. His name tag read Randy Morrison. He gripped his clipboard as though it were a sword, and he'd just been crowned the king of petty enforcement. Mr. Henderson, Karen cooed with fake charm, we've had an anonymous complaint about your commercial fishing business. I nearly spit out my coffee. Commercial fishing? This is my private lake. I stock fish for myself. Randy puffed up his chest, tapping the clipboard against his thigh in a nervous rhythm. Sir, I'll need to see your business license for this aquaculture facility. Otherwise, I'll have to fine you $500 a day until you comply. Now, I dealt with my share of crooked inspectors over the years, and Randy radiated the same slick energy as a used car dealer peddling a lemon. But I played it cool. I fetched my deed and personal stocking permits. These are strictly for recreation, I explained. I release about 50 trout twice a year. Randy barely skimmed the papers. The anonymous report says otherwise. Until you prove it's not commercial, the lake is closed. That evening, while Karen probably toasted her victory with overpriced Chardonnay, I pulled out my old laptop. 2 decades in municipal government had taught me one truth: bureaucrats always leave a trail. And I was about to follow Randy's straight to the cliff. The first fine was explosive. His inspector credentials had expired 2 years earlier. The man threatening me with fines wasn't legally qualified to inspect a lemonade stand, let alone my property. I remembered a case in my county days where a fake inspector tried a similar scam. The trick was to document everything before they realized they were exposed. I screenshotted his expired license, filed a formal complaint with the state licensing board, and dug deeper. Public records showed Randy had been conducting inspections across 3 counties, all with those expired papers. This wasn't simple negligence, it was organized fraud. When the state board finally caught wind and confronted him, Randy reportedly unraveled completely. Word spread quickly in a small county. The courthouse gossip was that he called Karen in a panic, begging her to clean up the mess. Karen's solution: attack harder. 3 days later, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a bill from the Lakeside Luxury Estates HOA, charging me a $500 monthly liability insurance surcharge for so-called dangerous water activities. They even backdated it to January. Since it was July, they claimed I owed $3,000. I had to give them credit for sheer audacity. Karen was effectively trying to make me pay rent for swimming in my own lake, the same one my grandfather dug out with a borrowed bulldozer in 1952. While Randy was staring down a $10,000 fine and possible criminal charges for impersonating an inspector, I was busy digging into property law. I dug into legal precedents. Years back, I'd studied a landmark Supreme Court case on government overreach. Lucas v. South Carolina. In that case, regulators tried to block all development on a man's coastal land. The court made it clear the government can't strip away every economically beneficial use of private property without paying compensation, the core principle. They can't demand fees or restrictions for lawful activities on your own land. With that precedent in hand, I filed for a preliminary injunction in county court to stop Karen's extortion scheme. At the same time, I hired a surveyor to double-check my property lines. Call it instinct to decades of wrangling with shady operators had taught me to always confirm the fine print. The survey results felt like Christmas morning wrapped inside a lottery jackpot. Turns out Karen's prize subdivision had crept 15 feet onto state forest property. 3 houses, one of them owned by her cousin Danny, were technically trespassing on public land. I made an anonymous call to the state forestry department. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is just following the rules and letting your adversaries trip over their own rope. Within a week, 3 HOA homes were slapped with violation notices for illegal land use. The fines? Up to $50,000 per house, plus the cost of removal. Compared to that, Karen's little $3,000 insurance bill looked like pocket lint. The next morning, Karen stormed over my property line like Sherman marching through Georgia, except Sherman likely had better manners. Her face was the shade of a stop sign, and she was shrieking about harassment and tanking property values loud enough to send loons fleeing and probably wake the dead to counties over. "You think you're clever," she screamed, jabbing her manicured finger at me. "I'll sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress." I calmly handed her the freshly printed court papers for my injunction hearing. "See you in court, Karen. Bring a lawyer and a checkbook, you're going to need both." She opened and closed her mouth like one of my trout gasping for air. The sound of her heels clicking angrily away on gravel was sweeter than any loon call. But apparently, Karen hadn't learned a thing from the Randy fiasco. 2 weeks later, she tried to take things up a notch: psychological warfare. And by that, I mean she called the local news. I was out feeding my trout their morning ration. Yes, I kept them on a feeding schedule. Don't judge when I heard the heavy tires of a van rolling up my driveway. Gravel crunches differently under that kind of weight, like bubble wrap made of stone. Out stepped reporter Megan Torres, followed by a cameraman whose expression said he'd rather be covering literally anything else. And behind them, Karen slid out of her BMW dressed in what I can only describe as her concerned citizen disguise. Conservative blazer, toned-down makeup, and the fog-steery look of someone mourning the tragic decline of neighborhood property values. "Ma, Henderson," Megan called out, walking with that professional stride reporters rehearse. "We're here about allegations that your activities on this lake may be threatening the community's water supply." I glanced at Karen. She'd strategically positioned herself in the background, flanked by 3 neighbors she'd clearly recruited as extras. Their faces carried that same manufactured worry you see in pharmaceutical ads right before they start rattling off side effects. "Ma'am," I said, setting down the fish food, "I'm not sure what concerns you mean." The questions came rapid fire. Was I aware of environmental risks? Didn't I care about children's safety? What about property values? It was obvious Karen had spoon-fed Megan a script designed to paint me as some kind of ecological menace. But here's the thing about sitting through 20 years of municipal hearings: you learn how to stay composed when someone's trying to corner you in public. So I smiled, and I invited the crew to test the water right then and there. The look on Karen's face when I dipped a glass directly into the lake, raised it to the camera, and drank it while holding eye contact, priceless. Like watching someone realize they'd brought a squirt gun to a tank fight. "This water has been tested 3 times this past year by County Environmental Services," I explained evenly, pulling out a folder thicker than a phone book. "It's cleaner than most city water supplies. Would you like to review the reports?" I handed Megan the documents. I handed Torres a full stack of evidence, environmental inspection reports confirming the lake's water quality was pristine, historical deeds showing my family's water rights dating back to 1892, up-to-date county permits, and photos clearly proving that Karen's subdivision had crept onto state forest land. You could almost see the narrative pivot on camera. Megan's questions grew sharper, zeroing in on why Karen's accusations didn't match the documentation in front of her. Karen, meanwhile, began sweating despite the cool October air that carried the smell of burning leaves through the valley. "Mrs. Whitmore," Megan asked, swiveling the camera toward her, "do you have any evidence to support these claims of contamination?" Karen's reply was a tangled mess of vague warnings and speculative community concerns. Her eye twitched a tell I'd seen 100 times during tense budget meetings with shady contractors. That's when I decided to drop the card I'd been holding. Years of auditing municipal contracts had given me a wide network, and a few discreet calls revealed Karen's history. She wasn't new to wrecking neighborhoods. "Megan," I said calmly, "you might want to investigate Mrs. Whitmore's previous communities in California and Arizona. The paper trail paints an interesting picture." Karen went pale beneath her makeup. She knew I'd done my homework. The interview wrapped up with her demanding equal airtime to share the HOA aside. Megan agreed, which turned out to be Karen's next blunder. While I prepared for round 2 with even more documentation, Karen spent the week trying to cash in favors, and fortunately for her, the station manager was Jim Patterson, an old colleague of mine from Municipal Transparency Projects. Small world when you've got a reputation for honest accounting and busting financial fraud. The follow-up piece aired the next Thursday. Megan delivered a balanced report showing both perspectives, but Karen's performance was unintentionally hilarious. She contradicted herself, snapped at simple questions, and even admitted she'd never once tested the subdivision's well water. I, on the other hand, stayed calm and methodical, answering with facts and organized binders of proof. The contrast on screen was striking Karen and unraveling while I sat steady, looking like some unlikely bureaucratic superhero. The community response was overwhelming. My voicemail filled with neighbors thanking me for standing up to Karen's bullying. Many confessed they'd been too intimidated to speak out before, afraid of being targeted with HOA violations. But Karen wasn't finished. Embarrassed by the coverage and cornered by questions about her past, she chose to escalate again. That Monday, the county health department showed up at her urging. She'd filed a complaint alleging my septic system was leaking into the lake, polluting the watershed, and endangering public health. She demanded an immediate stop to all lake activities until a full investigation could be completed. The inspector, Marcus, was the real deal, credentials in order and professional demeanor. I welcomed him openly, even poured him a cup of coffee while he worked. When he examined my setup and found the state-of-the-art composting toilet system, his reaction wasn't what Karen had banked on. "This is actually a model of eco-friendly design," Marcus said, snapping photos. "Mind if I get your contractor's details? I know several people who'd want something like this." Karen's complaint was officially ruled frivolous, and malicious language I knew would come in handy later in court. The victory was sweet, but I also realized Karen was spinning further out of control. She was doubling down like a gambler convinced her pair of twos was pocket aces. By Friday afternoon, I was out back splitting firewood, letting the steady rhythm of the axe clear my head, when I heard the rumble of a delivery truck straining up my driveway. The mail carrier gave me an apologetic look as he handed over a certified envelope thick enough to choke a mule. The return address made me grin. The letterhead read Rutherford and Associates, Charlotte's priciest law firm. Karen had hired attorneys who billed $600 an hour to draft angry letters about things like parking squabbles. The cease and desist they sent accused me of nuisance water activities that supposedly violated local noise ordinances. Their argument: that my swimming produced disruptive splashing sounds that interfered with the neighbors' peaceful enjoyment of their property. They demanded $5,000 in mediation fees to avoid dragging me into a lawsuit. I almost had to laugh. Karen was literally trying to fine me for making splashes in my own lake. She had elevated petty tyranny into performance art. And the legal threat was just her opening move. That weekend, she orchestrated a surveillance circus. HOA members began creeping by at a crawl, phones out, recording everything I did. Passive-aggressive notes appeared on my truck windshield lecturing me about community standards and neighborly conduct. By Monday, the county itself suddenly seemed fascinated by my property. Building inspector on Monday, fire marshal on Tuesday, tax assessor on Wednesday, each inspection sparked by anonymous complaints. The air around the lake thickened with the smell of bureaucratic harassment, heavier than morning fog. I'd seen this strategy before, death by 1,000 paper cuts. The purpose wasn't to find violations, it was to grind me down with constant pressure until I gave up and moved away. Karen was running the standard playbook on legal attrition. But she'd overlooked one thing. She was up against someone who knew exactly how to dig through public records and follow financial trails. That weekend, I spent 2 straight days in the county records office, a place that smelled of mildew, ink, and broken promises. What I uncovered was better than Christmas morning. Karen's subdivision had been constructed under an emergency wetlands permit that required a 25-foot buffer from natural water sources. 3 houses, including Karen's very own McMansion, sat well within the restricted zone. The penalty? Fines of up to $10,000 a day, with the possibility of demolition if the environmental damage was bad enough. But that wasn't the juiciest discovery. Using North Carolina's public records law, I requested the HOA's financial statements, something any property owner in the subdivision had the right to do. What I found made Randy's expired inspector license look like jaywalking. Karen had been bleeding the whole treasury dry. No competitive bidding on contracts over $10,000, even though the law required it. Her husband Rick's landscaping company pocketed a $45.00 yearly deal. Pool maintenance went to her cousin Danny for $28,000 annually. And under legal fees, there were payments to her personal lawyer for cases unrelated to HOA business. Years ago, I'd handled a municipal fraud case that looked almost identical. The trick was to carefully document the pattern of self-dealing to show deliberate intent. Karen, thankfully, had left the paper trail wide enough to be mistaken for I-85. While I built my case, Karen tried another stunt. She filed for a temporary restraining order, accusing me of stalking home members and threatening violence during our property line dispute. Deputies served me the papers while I was feeding my trout one evening. I hired Patricia, an attorney with a reputation for dismantling corrupt HOA boards. She flipped through my documentation and gave me the kind of smile that makes opposing counsel lose sleep. "Garrett," she said, spreading the papers across her desk, "Karen's about to learn why you don't bring a knife to a gunfight." The courtroom showdown was pure theater. Karen showed up with 3 HOA members dressed in their Sunday best, all rehearsing their concerned neighbor faces. I arrived with a binder of evidence heavy enough to serve as ballast for a boat. Judge Margaret Yates, a no-nonsense veteran with 3 decades of experience sniffing out frivolous cases, poured over everything like a forensic auditor. Karen's witnesses fell apart under the simplest questioning, contradicting each other at every turn. My security camera footage clearly showed who had actually been harassing whom. When Karen's lawyer attempted to introduce evidence of my threatening behavior, Patricia calmly presented audio recordings of every interaction, on tape. Karen sounded increasingly unhinged, while I came across as measured and professional. Judge Yates dismissed Karen's restraining order on the spot, issued a temporary protective order against her, barred the HOA from surveillance and trespassing, and even ordered Karen to cover $2,500 of my legal fees. She also warned Karen she could face perjury charges for lying under oath. Karen's meltdown in the courthouse parking lot was legendary. She ranted about a corrupt system and accused me of destroying the community, shrieking loud enough to wake the dead in neighboring counties. A local reporter caught the scene and ran it on the front page under the headline, "HOA President's Courtroom Tantrum." That evening, several residents from her subdivision approached me quietly. They admitted she'd been bullying them to shutting down pool parties for noise, flagging lawn decorations as aesthetic violations, and citing guests for parking longer than 4 hours. Some even whispered about organizing a recall petition to kick her off the board. I savoured the victory, but Patricia wasn't done. She'd uncovered something else in the original records buried deep in the HOA charter. Hidden beneath all the dense legal jargon was a clause I'd overlooked, one that changed everything. It allowed any property owner within 1,000 feet of the subdivision to petition for membership as a voting member. My lake property not only qualified, but as the single largest parcel in the area, I would automatically hold 30% of the voting power. The irony was exquisite. Karen had been so busy scheming to control my land, she never realized I could simply walk into her little fiefdom and tip the scales against her. In trying to box me out, she'd unknowingly handed me the means to box her in. While Patricia was preparing our next legal maneuver, she stumbled onto something even bigger. She had been combing through the original subdivision plat maps, those dull technical drawings most people skim at best, when she spotted something that made her call me at 6:00 a.m. "Garrett, you need to get here right now," she said, her voice carrying the kind of electricity lawyers only get when they've found a smoking gun. Karen's entire development is a house of cards, and it's about to collapse. I drove through the early morning mist rising off my lake. They are filled with the damp, earthy scent of pine needles. When I walked into Patricia's office, the aroma of fresh coffee hit me, along with the sight of documents spread across her conference table like evidence in a high-profile investigation. The revelation floored me. Karen's subdivision had violated the county's master plan in a way that could jeopardize the entire project. That parcel was originally zoned for low-density, rural residential development, no more than 16 homes on its 95 acres. Instead, 47 oversized McMansions had been crammed in, overshooting the limit by more than 300%. How had the developer gotten away with it? By exploiting an emergency housing shortage provision created after Hurricane Florence in 2019, when thousands were displaced. The loophole allowed higher density construction, but only as a temporary measure. The critical word was temporary. Those emergency variances automatically expired after 5 years unless renewed by the county commission. Karen's precious subdivision variance was set to lapse on December 15, just 6 months away. If the renewal didn't happen, 31 houses would have to be torn down to restore compliance with the original zoning. The 16 survivors would be left staring down a financial catastrophe. Patricia ran the HOA's financial projections on her laptop. Right now, assessments are calculated with 47 households paying $320 a month, she explained, if 31 homes are demolished. That same budget gets divided among only 16 owners. Their dues will spike to $940 per month. The math was brutal, and most homeowners had no clue they were living on a financial landmine. But the real shock came from Karen's correspondence files, which we'd obtained through discovery. She had known all along about the looming expiration. She'd been quietly lobbying commissioners for months, trying to secure a renewal. But here's where her arrogance came back to bite her. In my years as a municipal finance director, I had worked alongside many of the current planning commission members. They remembered me as the guy who played by the rules, who caught financial irregularities before they blew up into scandals. Commissioner Martinez had even singled me out once, describing me as that nice man with the lake, an example of responsible rural development. Karen's public tantrums and harassment campaign had poisoned her credibility. Instead of gaining allies, she'd turned them against her. Her odds of getting that variance renewed were now somewhere between slim and none. That's when Patricia slid the whole charter across the table, pointing to a section that made my morning coffee taste like victory. Membership was defined as all property owners within the subdivision boundaries, including a 100-foot buffer zone surrounding the entire community. My land extended into that buffer by 23 feet. As a long-standing property owner, I had the legal right to join the HOA, and the charter spelled out that voting power was weighted by property size and assessed value. My 4-acre lakefront parcel, appraised at $485,000, gave me enough leverage to turn Karen's empire upside down. While the average home in the subdivision was valued at around $125,000, under proportional voting rules, that meant I would control 31% of the HOA's decision-making power. If you join, Patricia explained, you'll have the ability to block assessment hikes, call special elections, review financial records without the hassle of public records requests, and even propose charter amendments with your voting bloc. The irony couldn't have been sharper. Karen had spent months trying to bring my land under HOA control. Now I had the chance to step into her HOA and take control of her instead. But staring at those documents, a realization hit me. I didn't actually want to destroy this neighborhood. Most of the residents weren't my enemies, they were victims of Karen's abuse, just as I had been. The solution wasn't scorched earth. It was removing the problem at its root. My mission shifted: eliminate Karen's influence, repair the financial damage, and build an HOA that served its members instead of one woman's hunger for power. Word of the zoning variance expiring must have leaked, because Karen suddenly called an emergency whole meeting for Saturday, citing urgent financial concerns. The notice went out late, a deliberate tactic to suppress turnout. That left me 72 hours to submit my membership petition and rally support from residents ready for change. Saturday morning would be the battle for the future of the community. Patricia spent the weekend drafting airtight filings while I met with neighbors who had quietly approached me after my courtroom win. The stakes were high: control of the HOA and the financial stability of 47 families. The smell of coffee and determination filled my cabin as Patricia and I plotted like commanders preparing for a major offensive. Step 1. Secure allies. The first recruit was Johnny Morrison, a retired teacher from Maple Court who had spent 2 years documenting Karen's abuses. Johnny had that quiet, unshakable strength you've seen teachers who've endured entitled parents and shrinking budgets. Karen once fined her $200 over a bird bath. Concrete doves, apparently, didn't fit the architectural vision of suburban bliss. When I called, Jeanette's voice carried the weight of 2 decades of bottled-up frustration. "Mr. Henderson, I've been waiting for someone to finally take her on." "What do you need?" Jeanette opened a spiral notebook stuffed with 2 years' worth of records, fines, violations, harassment, all logged with the meticulous order of a grade book. Every surprise inspection. Every board meeting where dissent was shut down. Next was Bob Martinez, an accountant from Oak Ridge Drive who had dared to question HOA spending. Bob was a numbers guy, the kind who noticed when ledgers didn't add up, a dangerous quality in Karen's kingdom of fuzzy math. "I've been trying to see actual invoices for months," Bob told me when we met at the local diner. "They are heavy with bacon grease and honesty. Karen claims everything's proprietary. But I've already uncovered $43,000 in unexplained expenses this year alone." His spreadsheets revealed glaring irregularities: landscaping bills inconsistent with the work done, equipment purchases without delivery records, and legal fees tied to matters far outside HOA business. Our third ally was Lisa Park, a civil engineer who had originally designed the subdivision's drainage system before Karen tampered with the plans to cut costs. Lisa had the no-nonsense practicality of someone used to building things that actually have to function. "Karen altered my specs without permits," Lisa explained at our cabin strategy session. "Now storm runoff is being funneled straight toward your lake. If the state environmental agency reviews this, they could shut down the entire subdivision." Lisa brought not just technical expertise but credibility, evidence grounded in professional authority that could unravel Karen's empire. It was exactly the kind of preparation we needed to neutralize Karen's theatrics. By Friday evening, we gathered around my kitchen table for our final strategy session. Patricia laid out 3 meticulously organized binders, each designed to hit hardest where it mattered. The plan was precise: uncover Karen's financial misconduct, expose the ticking time bomb of zoning violations, and present my whole membership application as the obvious remedy for both. Bob would take the lead on finances, breaking down the numbers in plain terms any homeowner could grasp. $45,000 funneled to Rick's landscaping business for work worth less than half that. $28,000 paid for pool upkeep supposedly done daily but only performed weekly. And legal fees that included paying Karen's divorce lawyer with HOA funds. Johnny would share stories from residents who had been bullied and fined into silence, giving a human face to Karen's obsession with power. Lisa would walk the group through the engineering and environmental dangers Karen had covered up, making it clear her shortcuts threaten everyone. From my years in municipal government, I knew that statistics alone didn't sway people, it was stories that stuck. We had to show Karen not as a quirk of bad governance but as the root of the community's dysfunction. Every bogus fine, every intimidation tactic, every shady deal was part of a broader pattern of exploitation. Patricia reminded us of the legal framework. Under North Carolina law, a member could call an emergency board election if there was evidence of financial mismanagement. Once my membership application was approved, I'd have the standing end with 31% of the vote. Karen's faction couldn't block the motion. We also rehearsed backup strategies. If Karen tried to cut the meeting short, Patricia would cite the bylaws requiring resident concerns be heard, if she insisted I wasn't a member. My filed application gave me immediate standing, and if she tried to drag in the police. All our evidence was lawfully obtained, and the meeting was on public property. Saturday dawned with crisp October air that carried a sense of possibility. We regrouped at my cabin at 7 a.m., 3 hours before the whole meeting. The smell of bacon and coffee mingled with tension and purpose. Jana was nervous but resolute. Someone has to stop her before she ruins this place completely. Bob was eager to finally put the numbers on display. Numbers don't lie, he said, and hers have been lying for 3 years. Lisa brought technical maps and schematics, confident that once residents saw the scope of Karen's negligence, they'd understand why their fees kept climbing. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Instead of always reacting to Karen's antics, we were finally on the offensive, armed with facts, legal authority, and a plan. Patricia handed out copies of our evidence and reminded everyone what to expect: personal attacks, false claims, emotional manipulation. Stay steady, she said. Let her behavior condemn itself. By 9:30, we packed the evidence into Bob's van and drove to the community center. Anticipation tasted sharp and sweet. We'd done the homework, and Karen's grip on power was about to shatter. The only unknown was whether she'd go quietly or drag everyone down with her in a last fit of ego. The week leading up to the showdown had already shown how far she was willing to go. Like a cornered animal with Wi-Fi and a lawyer's vocabulary, she launched a smear campaign to wreck me before I could expose her. Late Friday night, Jana received threatening texts, spreading lies about HOA businesses grounds for a defamation lawsuit. The timestamp 11:47 p.m. proved Karen's insomnia had found a new hobby. On Monday, she phoned Bob's accounting firm, accusing him of misusing company resources to target innocent volunteers. Then came her piece de resistance, filing a misconduct report against Lisa with the state engineering board, all because Lisa had dared to call out her drainage violations. 3 women who had simply demanded accountability were suddenly facing professional retaliation from a president who had clearly lost touch with reality. Not finished, Karen filed yet another police complaint, claiming I'd threatened violence during our property dispute. Conveniently, she forgot that my cameras had recorded every moment. Deputy Martinez, the same one who once cited me for swimming, took the report and noted her inability to provide evidence and her increasingly erratic demeanor, but Saturday morning revealed her true masterstroke. I showed up early at the community center only to find a handwritten sign taped to the door: meeting relocated to 847 Maple Court due to security concerns. Karen's garage. She had moved an HOA meeting for 47 households into her 2-car garage, a space that could barely fit 15 people if they stood shoulder to shoulder. The place reeked of motor oil and desperation. Patricia objected immediately, citing the bylaws that required meetings be held in a space large enough for all members. Karen waved her off, insisting security threats justified restricting attendance. But as residents began arriving and found themselves clustered in the driveway, unable to hear what was going on, the complaints started. Nothing exposes petty tyranny faster than making your neighbors stand outside in the cold October air. Because you're terrified of democracy, that's why we're standing in your driveway. Karen's shriek cut through the chilly air the moment I pulled out my home membership application. You don't even live here. You can't tell us what to do. The expression on her face when Patricia calmly explained my legal right to join under the original charter was unforgettable, like watching someone realize too late they stepped on a landmine. Her inner circle husband Rick and cousin Danny included suddenly grasped the truth. My 31% voting power would render their little cabal useless. That's when Karen fully unraveled. She ranted about illegal interference and accused me of forging documents, bribing county officials, and running some vast conspiracy that supposedly involved the commissioners, the forestry department, and maybe even the Illuminati. Neighbors started backing away, visibly uncomfortable. When your whole president begins sounding like a tinfoil hat street preacher, loyalty evaporates fast. Patricia then cited Article 12 of the bylaw's emergency provisions requiring a membership vote when meeting space was inadequate. I'd seen the same stunt pulled during my municipal days by councils trying to silence public voices. The fix was always simple: force a vote and let democracy decide. With 23 residents present, the count was 18 in favor. 5 opposed. The meeting was officially moved to the community center. Karen flat out refused to recognize the outcome. Shouting that only board members could call meetings, Patricia countered with state law. When rights were being trampled, members had authority to override the board. That's when Karen picked up the phone and called the police. Deputy Martinez showed up looking like a man who'd rather be writing traffic tickets than refereeing a neighborhood squabble. When Karen demanded arrests for illegal assembly, he explained patiently that this was a civil issue and encouraged everyone to behave like adults. His advice went ignored. So the group relocated to the community center, a public space where Karen couldn't hide behind garage walls and intimidation. 31 residents attended, the largest turnout the HOA had ever seen. The atmosphere buzzed with pent-up energy, like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Karen stormed in 20 minutes late, her attorney patched in by speakerphone, insisting the meeting was invalid because of the relocation. By then, the residents' patience was gone. They wanted answers about money and governance, not another episode of Karen's meltdown theater. I stayed quiet, taking notes while Karen buried herself deeper with every objection. Residents started pressing her directly about landscaping costs, pool maintenance, and legal bills. She dodged, contradicted herself, and grew more frantic by the minute. When Bob Martinez rose to question the $45,000 landscaping contract, Karen claimed it was proprietary and off-limits. Bob calmly produced public records showing grossly inflated charges. In the corner, Rick Whitmore's face glistened with sweat like a man watching his gravy train derail in slow motion. Panicking, Karen lashed out at me personally. She dredged up Sarah's death, claiming I was unstable, a threat to children, and a danger to property values. The room froze. Even her allies recoiled at her cruelty, weaponizing a widower's grief to cling to power. John M. Morrison stood up, trembling with anger. Karen, you fined me $200 for a bird bath. When did we decide cruelty was part of being neighbors? Her words broke the dam. Other residents began sharing their own stories of intimidation and petty fines. Years of bottled frustration burst forth like water through a shattered levee. Karen tried to adjourn the meeting, but no one budged. The taste of democracy was too sweet after years under her thumb. I stepped forward with my binders of evidence. Karen made one final, desperate outburst. I won't let you destroy our community, she screamed. I'm not here to tear this place down, I answered evenly. I'm here to save it. That moment set the stage for the final act. The week between the garage fiasco and the community showdown, Karen went full scorched earth. Not just desperate, obliterate everything in sight, desperate. The kind of meltdown that would have impressed Napoleon limping out of Moscow. She even hired a private investigator, a washed-up ex-cop named Wade, who cruised around in a dented sedan and reeked of cigarettes blended with regret. He tailed me through town, snapped photos through my cabin windows, and harassed my elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson with questions about my mental stability and daily routines. Karen's social media war spiraled into complete fiction. She built fake accounts to spread rumors I was planning a commercial fishing business that would tank property values. She posted doctored screenshots of threatening messages allegedly from me, complete with creative spelling mistakes to sell the lie. The low point, though, was when she weaponized Sarah's death. She spread the claim that Sarah hadn't died from cancer but had taken her own life, and that I was covering it up to save face. That was the moment Karen went beyond petty tyranny and into moral bankruptcy. Even by her standards, it was vile enough to impress Stalin. But while she shredded her own credibility with theatrics, I was finishing the puzzle that would topple her for good. Bob Martinez uncovered the smoking gun, bank records proving Karen had siphoned $85,000 from the HOA's reserve fund to buy herself a Myrtle Beach condo. The expense was disguised as emergency roof repairs for the community center. Yet the very day the money vanished, Beach Breeze Condominiums, Unit 247, was deeded in her name. Her own social media gave her away pictures of her toasting champagne on the beach while residents thought their dues were fixing infrastructure. It was breathtaking in its arrogance, like robbing a bank and then posing with the loot on Instagram. Meanwhile, Patricia coordinated with the county prosecutor, who began assembling an embezzlement case. Under North Carolina law, each fraudulent withdrawal carried a sentence of 2 to 10 years. Karen wasn't just in danger of losing her whole crown, she was staring down a prison cell. Then Wade overplayed his hand. On Tuesday evening, Mrs. Patterson called the sheriff after catching him trespassing on her property, peering through her windows like a creep. Deputies hauled him in on charges of harassment and illegal surveillance. To save himself, Wade immediately fingered Karen as his employer. His arrest report flat out stated that HOA President Karen Whitmore had hired him to dig up compromising material on a resident. Her intimidation campaign was now on record as criminal activity. By Thursday, I had the final nail for her coffin. My investigator, a professional outfit that didn't smell like an ashtray, delivered a dossier on Karen's history. She had pulled the same scheme in at least 3 other states: California, Arizona, and Florida. The playbook was identical: move in, seize the HOA, siphon funds, sow chaos, then disappear before prosecution could catch up. 2 criminal cases against her were still pending, and she owed $127,000 in civil judgments. Karen wasn't just a petty dictator in pearls. She was a career con artist with a coast-to-coast rap sheet. The morning of the showdown, I noticed a U-Haul trailer hitched to her BMW. She clearly intended to bolt right after the meeting, likely with whatever cash she could grab before the law closed in. The community center was jammed to bursting: 67 residents, the largest turnout in subdivision history. Channel 7's Megan Torres had set up with her crew in the back, tipped off about the HOA scandal. County Prosecutor Williams and Detective Hayes sat quietly in the last row, ready to serve an arrest warrant the moment Karen incriminated herself on camera. Outside, Deputy Martinez stood watch, well aware of her history of meltdowns when cornered. Karen showed up draped in flashy new jewelry almost certainly bought with HOA funds, her expression a mask of brittle confidence. The kind you see in pyramid scheme leaders seconds before everything collapses. Her husband, Rick, was conspicuously missing, having already skipped town to Oklahoma with whatever liquid assets they had left. From the outset, she tried to seize control, limiting discussion under the preteens of security concerns and pushing for a shortened agenda. But the moment I stood and invoked Robert's Rules of Order, Patricia rose with our completed membership paperwork. The review period expired yesterday, she announced. Mr. Henderson is now a full HOA member with a 31% voting share. Karen's face drained of color as the realization sank in. The balance of power had shifted permanently. The room buzzed as residents grasped that, at last, Karen no longer held their futures in her fist. I walked calmly to the podium, 3 binders of evidence in hand, my voice steady with the practiced authority of 2 decades in municipal meetings. I'd like to present financial irregularities for board review. The moment arrived like a freight train. 67 residents filled the community center, the largest turnout ever. The air electric with anticipation and the faint smell of coffee from the concession stand. Channel 7's bright lights cast the room in sharp relief, turning the scene into a courtroom drama awaiting its verdict. Karen sat at the head table, her glittering jewelry like flimsy armor, hands trembling as she shuffled a stack of bogus legal documents. The U-Haul parked outside told everyone how much faith she had in her own defenses. I'd like to present some financial irregularities, I repeated, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had spent years in masking corruption. Karen's shriek cracked through the room. You can't discuss this, pitched high enough to unsettle dogs in the next county. I smiled at the camera. Embezzlement isn't confidential, it's criminal. Bob Martinez took the floor next, his accountant's precision slicing through Karen's financial smoke screen like a lighthouse beam. Cutting fog, his first slide, Rick's Landscaping Company, billed $67,000, actual value of work $23,000. This is a systematic pattern of inflated billing, Bob explained. Then came the pool contract, daily service, billed at $28,000 a year, though records showed weekly visits. Legal fees. Payments to Karen's personal divorce attorney, disguised as HOA business. Karen exploded, lunging at Bob's laptop like a rabid animal, screeching that the numbers were fabrications. But the harder she fought, the guiltier she looked, especially when surveillance footage appeared, showing transfers from HOA accounts into her personal bank. The knockout blow came with the slide of Beach Breeze condominiums, $85,000 withdrawn for emergency roof repairs the exact day she closed. In a Myrtle Beach condo, residents gasped as her social media photos appeared Karen sipping cocktails at the beach while they thought their dues were fixing infrastructure. Then I advanced to my investigators' findings. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Karen Whitmore Johnson, serial community destroyer. Gasps rippled across the room. 3 previous neighborhoods wrecked by identical schemes, pending criminal charges for fraud and grand theft in California, an $89,000 civil judgment in Arizona, and paid. Karen's total collapse began. She screamed that it was all lies, babbling about conspiracies, while her few remaining allies quietly edged toward the exits. Grabbing the microphone, her voice cracked with desperation. "This man is dangerous. He threatened to poison our water. He stalks children." She even waved a forged mental health evaluation with the wrong doctor's license number so sloppy that residents actually laughed out loud. That's when County Prosecutor Williams stood, his badge catching the light. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Prosecutor Williams. You are under investigation for embezzling $127,000 from your neighbors." The Channel 7 camera zoomed in as Karen realized her tantrum, her false accusations, even her perjury, had been caught live on television. Her face cycled through shades like a malfunctioning mood ring. "This is illegal surveillance," she shrieked, lunging at the camera crew. Her designer heels slipped on the polished floor, and she stumbled forward in a moment of almost slapstick irony. If the circumstances hadn't been so serious, it might have looked like dark comedy. Detective Hayes stepped forward with handcuffs, reading Karen her Miranda rights while she shrieked about conspiracies and political persecution. For the cameras, the charges were laid out clearly: embezzlement, fraud, filing false police reports, and witness intimidation. Each offense carried significant prison time. And the mountain of evidence was undeniable, as she was escorted out, still screaming threats at anyone who would listen. The community center fell into a heavy, stunned silence. Officers searched the waiting U-Haul and uncovered stolen HOA property. Everything from a commercial-grade lawnmower to pool equipment worth thousands. When the flashing police lights faded into the night, I turned to address the shaken crowd. "I never set out to destroy this community," I said, my voice carrying in the hushed room. "I wanted to save it." John and Morrison began clapping first. Then others joined, until the applause swelled like a wave. Some cried, others hugged neighbors, finally releasing years of bottled-up anger and relief. I called for an emergency vote to strip Karen of all HOA authority. With her proxy votes now void, the decision passed unanimously. On the spot, the residents chose a temporary board, Bob as treasurer, John as secretary, Lisa Park as president. When someone asked if I wanted a seat, I declined with a grin. I'd rather serve as an advisor. My lake will always be open for community fishing. It's time we started acting like neighbors again instead of opponents. That night ended with something I hadn't seen in 3 long years: neighbors chatting like friends instead of rivals in a property value arms race. The sweetness of victory wasn't in Karen's downfall, but in seeing the community start to heal. After years of abuse, her petty dictatorship had ended, toppled not by rage but by documents, receipts, and yes, one very expensive U-Haul stuffed with evidence. Justice had been delivered with a side of financial accountability and a generous helping of neighborhood solidarity. And best of all, every step was lawful, airtight, and recorded for history. Sometimes, the good guys really do win, especially when they bring competent lawyers and real evidence to the fight. 6 months later, I found myself sitting on my dock, watching children learn to fish while their parents laughed and talked like actual neighbors. The smell of burgers on the grill from our first annual Lake Day festival drifted across the water, mingling with pine and the sound of joy that hadn't been heard here in years. Karen ultimately pled guilty to avoid a trial and was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. Her beloved beach condo didn't last long either, seized under asset forfeiture faster than you could say emergency roof repairs. Rick, her husband, was extradited from Oklahoma and handed 18 months for conspiracy, while Inspector Randy walked away with probation and a permanent ban from any public work. The new board wasted no time launching what we call the Transparency Revolution. Monthly financials went online for everyone to see. Competitive bidding was required for any contract above $1,000. Quarterly town halls replaced Karen's secret, closed-door sessions. We dismantled every one of her oppressive rules, transforming the covenant from a weapon of intimidation into a set of simple, neighborly guidelines. Even the zoning disaster that once threatened to erase 31 homes was resolved through honest collaboration. With my municipal contacts, I helped negotiate the variance renewal, working alongside county planners to craft a sustainable path that protected both the lake and property values. The community secured permanent grandfather status, and 15 problematic homes were located at the developer's expense to meet environmental requirements. My lake became the centerpiece of a reborn community. What had once been my private refuge, Sarah's Sanctuary, named for my late wife, was now shared by everyone. Kids learn to fish there, neighbors store their canoes, and anyone needing peace can slip into the water for an evening swim, just like I once did. The dock my grandfather built in 1952 has been expanded to welcome the entire neighborhood, and the sound of children splashing would have brought Sarah endless joy. The ripple spread far beyond our subdivision. Nagantor's investigative series won a regional Emmy, and the story went viral under the headline, "How One Man Saved His Community from an HOA Tyrant." Soon after, I testified before the state legislature about HOA reform, helping shape what became known as Karen's Law, a statute mandating annual independent audits and full financial transparency for every homeowner. Ours Association. Requests for help poured in from other neighborhoods dealing with their own authoritarian boards, and I realized I'd found a new purpose. Using 2 decades of municipal finance expertise to help ordinary people take back their communities from power-hungry bullies was more rewarding than I ever imagined. Financially, our recovery exceeded expectations, between asset forfeitures, insurance payouts, and the return of stolen property. The HOA ended up wealthier than before Karen's schemes. Monthly dues dropped to $180 less than what members paid when she first seized power, and our reserve fund grew stronger than ever. Property values rose by 12% after her removal, proving that real transparency and cooperation do more for real estate than intimidation and lawsuits ever could. Treating neighbors like human beings turned out to be the best investment of all. For me, the lake that once carried me through grief became something greater, a symbol of shared resilience. Losing Sarah will always leave an ache in my heart, but channeling that loss into building something better has given me a new sense of purpose. Just last week, I got a call from Tennessee. A homeowner's voice, shaky with anger and hope, told me their HOA was blocking disability modifications, a wheelchair ramp for a veteran. "Sir, I heard what you did in North Carolina. My HOA is fining me for making my home accessible." I looked out at my lake as Jonna Morrison showed her granddaughter how to cast a line, and Bob Martinez flipped burgers at our monthly cookout. Neighbors laughed together in the golden light, finally free of fear. "Tell me everything," I said, grabbing my notebook. "Let's see what we can do." Here's what this journey taught me: petty tyrants only succeed when good people stay quiet. But when neighbors unite armed with documents, legal know-how, and the will to stand up, justice doesn't just become possible, it becomes inevitable. The best revenge against corruption isn't more corruption, it's building something better, together. So, if you've got your own HOA horror story, share it in the comments. I read every one. And trust me, Karen wasn't even the worst case I've heard. If this story made you rethink what's possible when you fight back against bullies, hit that subscribe button. More tales of neighborhood justice are coming your way. Next week's an HOA president who tried to steal a veteran's service dog. You won't believe how that ends. Because sometimes the good guys really do win when they bring receipts, strong lawyers, and an unwavering belief that communities deserve better than narcissistic rule. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got trout to feed and a community to enjoy. Share your thoughts below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous HOA battles are right around the corner.